Hello, and thank you for watching Accelerate with Nerdio. In today's video, we're going to discuss best practices for installing applications on your template. So that could be the golden image, it could be a pull template. If you need further information on templates or any of the other topics discussed today, we will post links in the description. And always check out help.nerdio.net for access to all of our videos and articles. Let's jump right into our agenda. So today we're going to talk about some prerequisites, and then we'll talk about some tips for installing. We'll talk about some tips for updating, and we'll talk a little bit about SysPrep and some tips to make sure that completes successfully. And then we'll do some live demoing. So let's talk about those prerequisites. You're going to need a domain admin user. You're going to need the template powered on and accessible. You'll need access to your installer file or files. And I would always recommend reviewing any vendor recommendations, right? Because we're going to focus on, or you'll want to focus on multi-user installing, and you'll want to have licensing considerations thought out before you install. So let's start with some install tips. I always like to copy the installer to the local drive. I tend to use ctemp, right? We want to work out of a central folder on the OS drive. We don't necessarily want to work out of downloads, right? Because when you're logging in, you're likely mounting your FSLogic profile, and if you're running the installer out of there, it could create temporary files, use up a lot of that space, create other problems. So our focus for today's example will be using ctemp to run the installer. I prefer to run it as administrator. You can right click on it, choose that run as administrator option. And then I tend to log off and do a reboot of the machine after the install. And then I'll go in and check and see if there's any additional items added to like the startup routine that I don't want there. Maybe additional pop-ups or other utilities that aren't part of my plan. So we've got the install done. Now what about updates, right? Now this could be updates for the application or even updates to the Windows OS, right? Please remember that the template spawns your desktop or your hosts. So if we think about hosts, which are dynamic, if you've got updates pending or if your updates aren't paused, it's going to run them on the hosts and consume CPU and possibly put updates in that you're not ready for. So we want to pause and control updates for application, for Windows, so that you can choose when you go into the template, when you allow them, and when you push them out to the environment. And as always, right, complete any of those updates if they're pending while you're updating, right? Because you don't want there to be a pending update that then gets transitioned into a desktop, right? Because it's going to force those desktops to reboot. So make sure that template is in a clean state before you go ahead and push it out to the environment. And then real quick, SysPrep, right? SysPrep is Microsoft's way to generalize the template before building the machine. You don't want to manually run SysPrep. Azure is actually going to SysPrep the template for you. If you run SysPrep beforehand, it will break things that are on the template. And then we don't want you to look at installing any local agents that could interfere with SysPrep. Again, SysPrep is a Microsoft product. AV, local firewall, things like that could block SysPrep from running if they're on the template. So you'll want to make sure you've got that strategy, right, to install those kinds of agents onto the hosts once they get past the template state. So not on the template. And with that, I'll go ahead and jump into a demo. For today's purposes, I'm actually going to work on my pool B template. So here I am in the NAP. I'm in servers. Here's my pool. I'm going to click manage hosts. I see that my template is turned on. And so to connect to this, I'm going to go to FS01 and then RDP to my pool B template from there. So I'll copy the proper name here so I can reach it. And I'm logging into FS01. Okay, so I've logged into FS01 and I'm on my pool B template. We can see that right up there. So for today's example, right, first, let's take a look at what is already installed. I can pull up control panel, programs and features here. So I've just got a few things, right? I've got Chrome. I don't even have Office on this template. I'm going to use Adobe as my example for today. So if I pull up File Explorer, and I go to ctemp, like we talked about previously in the slides, I've got the installer there. So what did we talk about, right? Place the installer in temp, and then I'm going to run it as administrator. And I'm going to say yes. And again, this is important because the way SysPrep works, when it generalizes, if you're going to have a program that all users need access to, a few things need to happen, right? It needs to be installed and available for all users. And if you install things for a single user during SysPrep, that user's information gets removed, right? It's generalizing the image. So again, I'm running as an admin, and if the option comes up, if the installer doesn't offer install for all users, I'm going to make sure I choose it. We'll give this a minute to finish the install. And while that's running, this is a great time to look at Windows updates, right, for some of the things we spoke about. So I actually have some updates failed because it needs to reboot and finish some other updates. And I wouldn't want my host like this, right? So I want to make sure everything gets done on here, and then I put it back in pause state before I move forward. And I also want to point out right here, right, some settings are managed by your organization. So if we look at those policies, we'll notice there's GPOs that actually disable automatic updates. This is great. This makes sure that my hosts, when they're delivered, also aren't going to have those update triggers running. And so I can always come in here to the template and I can generate, place those updates, and then put it back in a pause state before I deliver it as a host. Okay, Adobe finished installing. I'm not going to worry about launching it yet. I'm going to hit finish, and I'm going to continue to get my updates all set up here. I'll probably reboot this machine a few times, and then I'll make sure that everything's paused and ready for me to push it out into the environment. Let's see, we can refresh this. I see Adobe's here now. So the next step for me, right, is to finish this, do any reboots, any other tightening up that I need, and then I would jump back to the NAP and I would power off and set as image, and then I can actually run the update host option to update one or more hosts in the pool and then test against it. So that's really it. It's very simple. The key things to remember, right, make sure that you're installing as an admin, make sure that you're using multi-wise installers or multi-user installers, because these are shared resources if they're in pools, and just make sure you're keeping an eye out for best practices around Microsoft SysPrep and other generalization items. As always, help.nerdio.net for a lot of additional information on this, and definitely look at some Microsoft forums to always better understand best ways to install applications on Microsoft OSs. Thank you again for watching. Have a great day.